Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Wickland. I'm the Communications Director for the City of Hermantown. I'm joined by Eric Johnson, our Community Development Director. And today we're going to talk about the Community Recreation Initiative as a whole on the back end, but our focus today will be on the Hermantown Connector Trail System. We'll walk through a little bit of the history of our trails, a little bit of the overall ethos of what trails can do to a community like us and why it kind of fits for the Recreation Initiative, and then what's possible in November in the vote, and what's possible for trails, whether that passes or doesn't pass going forward. Because again, as we think about the three component projects, the trail system, the reimagining of Fickner Park, and the possible addition of a second sheet of indoor ice, they're three separate projects, three separate questions, which we'll cover during today's presentation. But the trails are a little bit unique in that a portion of that system is already done before this initiative happened, before the possibility of it. So we'll have some Q&A at the end. I've got a couple of questions that folks have already asked before today's meeting started that I'll tee up for you. But beyond that, we'll kind of keep it quick and to the point here at the beginning and then dive into some Q&A at the end. Let me set up the presentation here. And do you guys have that on the screen? Perfect. And this will follow, again, the same format in mid-July. Eric and I, as well as outside consultants who are doing the design work, talked about the Fickner Field portion of the Community Recreation Initiative. Today, we're focusing on the Hermantown Connector Trail System. And then starting sometime in September, we haven't set the date yet, we'll have an arena-focused meeting. And then after that, probably late September, a couple in October, even one right before the election, we'll just have some broad, open discussions about the Community Recreation Initiative, not necessarily kind of dialed in on one particular component project, but questions and answers and interesting information that comes up related to all three and the project as a whole, especially as we get closer to the vote. What you see before you is the Boulder Trail. So part of, again, what I mentioned is interesting about this particular component project is it is some percentage, 25-26% of the Hermantown Connector Trail is already done, with the 2.65 plus miles of Boulder Trail that's complete, and a half mile from Morris Thomas Road down to King Creek Park. And so you can see the Boulder Trail there before it. So as a city, we've gotten really incredible positive feedback community-wide about this trail. The accessibility of it, that it's available 365 days a year with a few exceptions as we keep it cleared in the winter, that it provides some fantastic traffic-free outdoor opportunities for walking, biking, hiking, dogs, all kinds of different things like that, as something that our community, which is a pretty active community, has always wanted. So if you think about the amount of phone calls we get at City Hall that are positive, it isn't many. You wouldn't totally be surprised, but 100% of the feedback we've gotten about the Boulder Trail has been fantastic. So as we think about what's on the docket for November, the local option sales tax referendum would allow $4.5 million to be dedicated for the trail system. That is, dangerously close, if not close enough to complete it. Eric can talk a little bit more about that, but makes us feel really comfortable that something that maybe is 10, 15 years, if not a generation or more out from completion through granting, could be completed in the next 3 to 5 years. A discussion point that's been up pretty regularly, and you might be aware of it, there were possible changes to the amount of money for this project and all three projects, as well as some clarification around the questions themselves on the ballot, because it is three separate questions and they are a little wordy and not necessarily totally straightforward. But the special session that Governor Walz could or might call is unlikely. So the original amounts that were passed by the legislature and asked for by the city council are the amounts that are on the table. The original questions that were approved are the questions that are slated for the ballot. All of those questions are outlined on our website, so you can see them there, but it does pull out each project individually. They are not only 3 separate ballot questions, but even though we look at community recreation initiative and trying to impact the health and well-being and the health outcomes of all of southern St. Louis County with all 3 of these projects, they are 3 separate questions and 3 separate projects on the ballot. So 1, 2, or 3 of these can pass. They're not linked together. It's not a if this, then this, and if this, then this. But the sales tax increase will be the same regardless. It will be a 0.5% sales tax increase. That'll even us up with Duluth at the same sales tax as our largest neighbor. The goal for the trail system, and Eric will dive a little bit into this, but from a high view, it was just simply to be able to connect safely outside of traffic patterns on the various parts of Hermantown. We're a small community with kind of pockets. And so ideas like the wellness center and the school being able to be connected to City Hall and our parks and the marketplace and being able to travel to those places again by foot or bike without having to cross too many big roads was a real key part. As I've mentioned, the Boulder Trail and a small portion leading into Keene Creek opened last year. And again, the feedback on that has been resoundingly positive here at City Hall. Eric's going to talk a little bit about the grants that were critical in opening the current portions. Those weren't done with property taxes either, neither would the sales tax referendum. So it would be a $0 impact on property taxes if this passes. But as Eric will mention, future grants are an uncertain annual venture. We've gotten a lot of credit statewide for the start of our trail program, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the limited grant dollars will be ours to knock out a section, each subsequent year that we'd like to have going forward. So Eric, I'll turn over the next couple slides to you and you can walk us down the Boulder Trail.
Well, that sounds great. Thanks, Joe. As Joe had mentioned, this has been coming on almost a decade that this whole basically trail master plan has been talked about from a city standpoint. Back in 2014, the city engaged consultant Hoyzington Kogler to work with the cities of Hermantown, Proctor, and Duluth to come up with a master plan. And that happened over a course of essentially 9-10 months back in 14, number of public meetings held at that time. And what had been come out of that actual study or that master plan, initially there was 3 different routes that were being looked at throughout Hermantown and down into Duluth. The ultimate goal was to create a trail system that would link Hermantown, Proctor, and Duluth with the ultimate goal of connecting up to the Munger Trail system. So that document's actually called the Proctor Hermantown Munger Trail Spur. So it's quite a mouthful that way. We seem to like our Hermantown Connector Trail a little bit better that way as far as some language. But both ourselves and Proctor are looking at a 0.5% sales tax coming up in this voting session to hopefully realize, at least a good portion of the completion of this trail system. So back in 14, this master plan came into life, envisioning basically as a preferred route that would connect essentially the wellness center, the schools area, work its way through Hermantown, basically in a southeast tangent, getting down into Keene Creek. And at that portion time, it would head straight west again, get over to the boundaries of Proctor. From that point, Proctor would pick it up. There's a little bit more of an urban type of trail system, a lot more of just off-road type of trails is what they're envisioning, just because of the nature of the city that we have, or that they have. Hermantown is lucky. A good portion of where this trail is envisioned is either through areas that are not developed right now or slightly developed. To date, as Joe had mentioned, we've been able to construct 2 segments. There's essentially 7 segments associated with this trail system. Right now, what's been built is the Boulder Trails that you see in front of us. That connects Stebner Park down to Hermantown Road. That's at the southern terminus right now where the Ingwalls property used to be. The city was lucky enough to obtain a grant through the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission back in 2018. That grant was for $820,000 that could go towards the essentially the construction of this trail that you see before us. As part of that, the city did have to come up with $550,000 in matching grants, in which we were able to do, particularly in this Boulder Trail section. A vast majority of this Boulder Trail sits on top of a sanitary sewer line that the city constructed basically through 19 through 21. So like I said, as mentioned, a good portion of that trail is on top of that. Another trail segment that was able to be constructed with those grant dollars was from Morris Thomas Road down to King Creek Park. That's about a half-mile section that exists right now today. That's what you can see on the board right here. That for the most part parallels King Creek and terminates right now down at the parking lot of King Creek Park. It's eventually envisioned that this particular trail segment will continue down towards the south, where it will then match up with, there's an existing power line corridor that exists basically along St. Louis River Road. At that point, it heads west over to Proctor that way. As Joe had mentioned, grants are extremely competitive. I mean, we were lucky enough for the $820,000 through the Greater Minnesota grant. And then we received a smaller $50,000 grant from St. Louis County for accessibility. And that's the actual trail that runs between the soccer fields right now over at Stebner Park. And then through our partnership with St. Louis County, they were able to pave just some basically wider sidewalk section along Maple Grove Road from Stebner Road to the park. So there's been a number of partnerships so far to date that have envisioned this, upwards of 2.5 miles of trails that we have currently in the city. And the one nice thing about that is, again, as Joe had mentioned, is all those things were handled through weren't on property taxes that way. They were either from grant fundings or for basically sales tax that the city had available to do some of this work. So the city continues to go after grants for this work. So far, since I've been here, I think I'm maybe 2 for 10 in getting these grants. Like I said, extremely competitive. We will continue to try to go after these, but as Joe said before, under a grant scenario, this could be a career goal for Joe and I. Versus if a sales tax initiative was passed, this is something that all of a sudden can turn into maybe a 3 or 5 year period at that point. So we could really greatly increase the timeline to get this trail system up and going. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is this is, for the most part, a conceptual layout of how the trail system will go throughout the city. Right now, or actually starting next year on Uggstead Road, the city is going to be doing a roadway reconstruction project. So there will be a wider sidewalk, anywhere from 6 to 8 feet, going from Highway 53 down to that intersection at Arrowhead and Uggstead Road, right by the Wellness Center. From that point, this would then get more into this actual trail system that had been envisioned as part of the master plan. At that point, it would be a 10-foot wide trail. Once again, generally progressing on a southeast quadrant, eventually working its way over to City Hall here. We could see the City Hall as a potential, basically, stopover area, bike racks, things like that associated with it. And then the trail would start heading to the east over towards Lightning Drive in the city's industrial park. And then where you see the red on this, that's the existing trail system that's been built to date so far. So a good portion of basically the middle portion of this trail system has been completed. So we're really looking as part of this initiative to work on this north and south ends associated with it to try to get this citywide system of our trails that way and hook it over to Proctor, really set the table for them to pick it up from that point, be able to work it through their community and get down into Duluth. So really, so far, I mean, this is what you see on this map here is really the culmination of probably about 5 or 6 years worth of work from the city standpoint. And once again, depending on success of a recreation initiative, we could maybe complete this in 5 years' time. Or if not, we'd be looking more at grant opportunities and it'll be a much longer time frame, unfortunately.
And there are, if I click back to this, Eric, completely in the spot between, you mentioned that, originally our plan was to redo the Uggstead Road Super Project, which would kind of cover another section of this trail, kind of the section from Highway 53, the Erie, the school, the wellness center, kind of down toward Fickner Park. So we kind of have a pretty good idea that is going to end up that way. And then there's also a section between north of Keene Creek, not a full section, but a few pieces where we have trail easements already in place, kind of between Johnson and Okerstrom Road, right?
Yep, exactly. That's what on this map, you see King Creek Park, just north of that blue section. The city has about half that right now under control from an easement standpoint. We've also had conversations with the potential developer on that southerly portion. So there's really maybe only a quarter of this as you approach Hermantown Road that the city would need to engage potential property owners on that, at least to create or to complete that portion of the trail over on the eastern side of the city. Right now, to date, the city has not engaged any other property owners for easements, any work associated on these properties. That's something regardless that the city will be doing, whether a recreation initiative passes or not, because we'd like to at least get these easements in place. So as funds become available, we're able to start basically taking down portions or segments of this trail system.
So as folks are looking at the map there and that it is a concept we're shooting for, but not necessarily the exact location. And obviously, even if folks take a look at, if they've been down the Boulder Trail, they know that those red lines that we've got right there are not perfectly exact today. So some questions that have come up, at least on my side, I'm going to throw 3 of them up there that one I've already mentioned, and then 2 more that folks have been asked. But our goal here is to be clear on the information to allow people to be in the best position to make the decision they want when they vote, whether starting in early voting in late September all the way up to election day. Yes or no definitely is the choice of the residents, but it is important to be as clear as possible on what you're actually voting on. So one of the big questions is, will the sales tax increase be the same if 1, 2, or 3 pass? And the answer is yes. The only way that there won't be an increase in sales tax is if none of the 3 projects move forward, but it will only be a 0.5%, whether it is 1, 2, or 3, whether it is the park alone, the park and the trails, the park trails and the arena and the park, any combination of those. It will just be the amount of time for which the sales tax would change. That varies between each project, but it is a 20-year sunset for all 3 per the state legislature. This was really good and interesting information that I learned this week. We commissioned the University of Minnesota to perform a test or a study to determine how much of our sales tax is actually paid by residents and non-residents. Hermantown's a little bit of a unique community in that we are a smaller size community, but have some pretty significant big box retailers in us. There aren't a lot of areas in Minnesota that look quite like us. And at least we got the data back from the study this week, not yet the full study, but at least 75% of our sales tax in Hermantown is paid by non-residents. So any amount of monies that come in on our sales tax from places like Fleet Farm and Walmart and Sam's Club and Menards as kind of the big 4, 1/4 of that is paid by Hermantown residents and voters, and 3/4 of that is paid by non-residents. So as folks are making a decision about the sales tax, it's nice to have that information, knowing that for every, $4 that comes in sales tax, 3 of them are by non-residents at this point. We'll dial those numbers in with the University of Minnesota, but they felt really comfortable that 75 would be a baseline. That number might actually tick up a little bit as we wrap in those final numbers. And again, a big key driver of that is our smaller population in relationship with the types of shopping and general contracting and building resources that we have in town in terms of purchase power. And finally, it's what does a 0.5% look like and feel like? It could be a little bit hard to wrap your brain around, but part of that discussion is actually there's a significant amount of purchases you make that are sales tax ineligible. Groceries and clothing are not impacted by sales tax the same way other items are. And that list is exhaustive. We've got it outlined on our website right there. There are a lot of pieces that are unique. A new car does not have sales tax, but some of the pieces you can put on your new car do. So, but our website outlines all that. But if you do buy an eligible item, if you're scoring some lumber at Menards, if you spent $100, it would now be 50 cents more expensive if 1, 2, or 3 of these pass. That's kind of the best way to get a feel for the actual impact of that sales tax. Another way to look at it is that will now be the same amount as you would pay for that lumber at Menards in Duluth. They did a 0.5% sales tax increase, I think, within the last 2 years, and theirs focuses on some road fixes and road reconstruction and pothole work that's pretty important in Duluth. Obviously, ours is going in a different direction, focused on health, wellness, and community recreation. The Connector Trail System as a whole, again, is a unique part of these 3 component projects in that a chunk of it already exists. And like Eric said, and we'll probably talk about this more in Q&A, that we're in the process of finishing it. It's more how many years out could it be? It could be 3 to 5 if the sales tax initiative passes in November. It could be 30 to 50 if we continue to chunk it out on grants. And that's just, again, the nature of it. Eric said 2 for 10. You should know that that's actually that's a good batting average for a community development director going after those grants because of the demand on it. So we've been lucky, and Eric's worked really hard to get us the pieces we've had. And again, the feedback on those has been astounding. So at this point, I'll open it up to other questions, other thoughts that folks have, other pieces that you're wondering about. And it doesn't have to be limited to the trail system. You can ask about other component projects, other parts of the community recreation initiative, the mechanics of the voting, anything that we can do to help you out. Mike, go ahead.
Each of those 3 are separated. What is the plan if 1 or 2 or all 3 do not pass? So let's just take, let's say the ice cream one, let's say that one didn't pass. Does that mean that will not happen?
No. So Mr. Cappy's question is, if 1 or 2 or 3 or some mix of these does or doesn't pass, what happens? And obviously the ones that pass, we begin work on, and that, if we use the trails as the example, there's still a lot of work to be done on easements, exact locations, so it's not like we'll have brand new trails, totally in 2023, but we'll be able to time frame those really specifically. For the projects that don't pass, that's kind of it. They don't happen. I can use the trails as the example where we would continue to do the work that we're doing, Eric working on grants, all of us putting ourselves in the best position to be able to get different types of funding for different sections as they come available. And that work won't stop, but it won't be very quick. That's kind of the change.
Yeah, I think, and actually, I'll kind of jump in on that is I'm the liaison to the park board, and traditionally, all this work in the past has really been generated by park board dollars or grants that way. We have put together a master plan for Fichtner Park that you can see in this packet here. And that's projected at about $3.9 million for that. Right now with park dedication, we bring in $40,000 a year. That's essentially for each new home that's constructed, the city gets $1,100 in park dedication. So as Joe was saying, 3 to 5 years could turn into 30 or 40 years if some of these things don't happen. The trails are a little bit easier because there are grant dollars out there, but once again, just the highly competitive nature of it, we'll definitely spread out that time frame. The arena, I can't even begin to talk about with that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, on the Fichtner Park side of things, I think that, like Eric said, we'll continue to chip away at it with those limited park dedication fees. And the arena is kind of a different entity. I think that kind of work, because the city isn't involved right now in hockey at all, other than a $3,000 water grant that we give them to water, the same thing we do for baseball and for soccer, that we just would kind of not be getting in the business of hockey or getting in the world of hockey, the way that we're already in the world of parks with Fichtner Park, and the way that we're obviously already in the trail world.
And that's a nice thing about both the parks and the trails, because at least, let's say neither one of those passes, since there's multiple either segments with the trails or pieces associated with the park, like I said, you do have the ability to pick off smaller things associated with this. Fickner Park, you could replace some batting cages, you could replace some dugouts, things like that. A wholesale rebuilding of a field, that's a harder animal to take care of without the sales tax that way. Trails, once again, since there's 7 different trail segments, you could start looking at, says, okay, funds available now, let's do segment 7 to try to connect the dots that way. But even though when I first started, we were originally projecting trail costs at about $100 a lineal foot. And just obviously the way things have gone these last couple of years, it's approaching almost $200 a lineal foot now. In some of the areas, like when we went through Stebner Park, easy. Only had to cut down about a foot and a half, bring in some base work, pave it, you're good to go. The work in King Creek Park, we went down 15 feet because the soils, we couldn't find a bottom. It just kept on going through bad soils. And so some segments will be harder than others. There's no doubt about it. But, we'll attempt to keep doing what we can do with the funds available and go from there.
There's an interesting twist too on your question, which is specific to trails. Say ours doesn't pass, just to use that as the example, and Proctor's does. So Proctor's system would connect to the Munger Trail and work its way north if you were coming from the Munger and kind of stop at our border. And that might reprioritize that section higher for us or not, depending on grant dollars. Grantors might look at that favorably and want to get us grant dollars sooner. They might not. They might look at it as unfavorably. You had this chance to complete the whole section, so they might look at it differently. So a lot of those pieces are up in the air. The converse is we could finish, this could pass 50% plus 1 or more in the fall, and we would have a runway of knowing that the next 3 to 5 years we could finish it, and Proctor's could fail, and then we would have kind of that gap between where we hand it off to Proctor and you get to the Munger, but at least the Hermantown piece would be done. And Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but even Kenosha Township's done, not to the same degree, but some planning on kind of being able to come over to the intersection at 53. And there was some work done on that to make that slightly more, crossing friendly for people too.
Exactly. Their goal is they want to get over 53 with the Levake bypass over there, and then basically connect up into Kenosha. Their ultimate goal is to get to our border so they can hook up hopefully into our system and really get to the wellness center. That's something that they see as a great benefit to their community. And so they've been very appreciative of what we've been able to accomplish. And then just with this work on Uggstead Road that we're going to be doing over the next couple of years, that will help at least once again kind of set that table for at least Kenosha to be able to join us as well.
Go ahead, Mike.
And then to just flip that, so let's say all 3 pass. First of all, what is your guesstimate of how much would come in on a yearly basis for this 0.5%? And then how do you prioritize if you have all 3 of these to put money into? Like I would think, like if you're going to do the arena, that would take all the money for a long time because it's a large amount. So I would think that the trail system, for example, would get put off. Even though the money would be coming in, would get put off because you can't build half of the arena. You have to build, once you start, you got to do the whole thing.
So it's a really good question, Mike. I'm going to rephrase it for the recording, but the question is, what if all 3 pass? How would we, order of importance things? What happens? And the good news to your question is it doesn't operate that way that we have to choose. So I'm going to back up eventually to your answer, the dollars and cents, but we then can bond for the entire amount. So we can start construction, for lack of a better term. That'll look different on all 3 projects, but we can start immediately. So definitely, like you said, not going to build half an arena and wait for the money and half an arena and part of a baseball field. We'll be able to kind of look at all 3 of these and tackle them. Now that doesn't mean that they'll all be completed at the same time or they'll all be completed kind of in the same manner, because they are 3 kind of unique entities in how it works. Actually, if I had to guess, I think the trail system has got the likelihood of being done before the other projects, because we've had some success doing those. But there isn't, you don't have to wait, because we don't have to wait for the money to be in pocket, so to speak. Now to back up to the nuts and bolts of that, right now without this sales tax in place, just the 0.5% we have that funds things like this building and some infrastructure pieces, the Essential Wellness Center. We make the city generates about 3.3 million in sales tax each year. There's been some variation in that, which you'd expect during the pandemic, but not nearly the type of variation that makes us feel uncomfortable about budgeting for the next 0.5%. Kevin Orm, our Director of Finance, and Ehlers, who at the national level kind of pair with us to make sure that we don't, bite off more than you can chew as a city in doing this, has always really been impressed at how, for lack of a better term, truly conservative we are when we make these types of choices. And so the Wellness Center is a good example, entirely driven by sales tax. That window is likely to be able to be paid off years and years in advance of what was originally budgeted for, because those numbers on the sales tax side are as high as they've been. This additional 0.5% would generate roughly 1.4 million annually, but again, we wouldn't have to wait to spend it 1.4 at a time. We'd bond for it and kind of pay those bonds back and be able to get going on those projects. I would, again, by the letter of the law, it would sunset in 20 years if all three passed, but I would bet, based on our sales tax experience with the Wellness Center, that it would beat that mark again, and we would be in under 20 years and be able to sunset it sooner. There've been some changes to the laws on how sales tax works in each one of our projects like this building, projects like the Wellness Center, and should these projects pass. So there's different stipulations on how those sales taxes can be used and when they have to sunset. So the upcoming referendum's more clear than any of the other previous sales taxes as that hard sunset. And I bet we get done before the 20-year mark if all three pass. But that's if all three pass. If none pass, like you said, it's, none of these projects or the needs or the community members that are driving them go away. It's just how do we solve these in totally different ways? Great question. Thank you. Other thoughts or questions about trails projects or anything related to this? Yeah.
So I have a question about the part. Because part of that is to raise the whole field, correct?
Yeah, so part of the question Mike asked is what part of making that more functional is to raise what folks here call field one, or the main baseball field, to bring it up a little bit so that it's not as underwater in the spring. And there's kind of two versions that exist right now. There's the baseline version that is met by the $3.9 million that would be raised by the sales tax and the power of people's vote. And that would allow that field to be raised and turfed. And there'd be a couple other amenities like a new skate park, new sport court, new playground equipment put in there as well. And then there's certainly a more all of the parts included model that would include some philanthropic pieces beyond the power of the vote that folks may or may not be adding, but that's a to be determined. So, but that's a good question. I know that, Eric, I'll let you dive in on it.
Yeah, right now they're projecting anywhere from 18 inches to 3 feet, because they have to bring in a whole new sub system of granular material, drainage, et cetera, that way. So I've been hearing projections upwards of almost even 3 feet. So that's what'll make it interesting, assuming the Fickner piece passes, and how much monies are available. Because a big thing we want to be cognizant of is obviously accessibility within the park. Try to salvage what we can from the parking lot standpoint, and really be able to kind of make this work in there. I mean, right now there's not a lot of topographic change throughout the park that way. It's relatively pretty flat. And that's been the issue too, of why it just doesn't drain very well. And so, at least now, there's been conceptual plans done, and at least just some cross sections generated. Our city engineer has worked on these type of fields in the past in other communities. So they have a really good understanding of what will need to be done. And like I said, I've been hearing anywhere from 18 inches to probably up to 3 feet increase for that.
Wouldn't they have to raise all of that area in order, because wouldn't you just push it to another area?
Yeah, that'd be part of it. Right now, there's no stormwater ponds out there. So as part of the plan, there'll be stormwater ponds also. And then, but right now it would probably have a little bit more positive drainage going at least towards, basically I'll call it the creek or the middle part in the area right now. And, so yeah, I mean, we'll have to look at this thing holistically, how it's going to work out, considering that there'll be a market raising of that particular field.
And I think it's two parts in terms of that. If you think about field one, because one, the plan is it would be flipped. So it would get used differently and that would create space beyond the outfield, which is currently the infield, to be able to have some stormwater ponds to handle drainage kind of in that direction. And then the design pieces of the remainder of the park would be, we're not going to try and just move what is a current right field and infield issue on field one to another field. What can we do with drainage throughout that through landscaping and through the new design of field one to make sure that the park as a whole works?
And like you said, that, we could probably start having the ability of almost like quartering up that parkland, for lack of better words, that field one right now is like this, but as Joe said, it flips and now we have some positive drainage going towards that intersection where a potential stormwater pond would be. In that case, on this backside, yes, it'll be a little bit higher. Do we look at, how does that then translate to the rest of the park? Are there ramps? Are there any walls? Things we have to do with it? I mean, those are some more details that we'd dive into. But the same thing, I mean, a big part of this is not only that the baseball field, but just, accessibility within the park and, new elements there, the basketball courts, playground, et cetera. Those sort of things that we want that are a part of at least what we call the base plan right now as well.
And to centralize those a little bit, because field one's a little bit unique in that you're kind of away from the park if you're watching the games on those pieces, and it's not particularly convenient, if you have a young child who's playing a game and a younger child who needs the playground equipment. So this would be a little bit smarter design, and make the park more usable for people doing more than one thing at the park. And in essence, we've talked about it a little bit. It would get us, it might not be a full-blown central park the way people dream about a central park, but it would get us a significant step closer to kind of having that type of outdoor gathering space that we don't necessarily have as a community the same way, unless you're drawn into that park for a particular reason. This might be a little bit more of a reason to make it a community gathering space outside of baseball. Any other questions that we can help out with? Well, certainly appreciate those who joined online and those who are here in council chambers. Again, we put one of these together for the Fickner Park project in July. We've got the trails today. We'll have an arena one in September, and then there'll be some overall community recreation initiative informational meetings scattered throughout September, October, and November leading up to the vote. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here today.